A man mocked by his entire town for a foolish dream. A burden he never asked for. A legacy of dust and decay. Everyone thought he was a loser, destined to fail. But what happened when a single crack in the earth revealed a glimmer of something impossible? Get ready for a story that proves that sometimes the greatest treasures are buried right under our feet. Before we begin this incredible journey of perseverance and discovery, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this directly to you. The fluorescent lights of the Maple Creek High School cafeteria hummed a monotonous, weary tune, a sound that had become the soundtrack to Leo's life. Leo Gutierrez, 42, pushed a wide mop across the linoleum floor, the sour scent of old gravy and disinfectant clinging to the air. His shoulders, perpetually stooped from a lifetime of hard work and harder luck, ached with a familiar dull pain. From the teacher's lounge, a wave of laughter spilled out. Leo didn't need to hear the words to know the subject. His name, followed by that dilapidated farm, an old fool. The jokes were a constant, low-grade hum beneath the surface of his days, ever since the letter from the lawyer had arrived 3 weeks ago. He finished mopping and began stacking chairs, the screech of metal legs echoing in the empty space. His mind, as it often did these days, drifted away from the greasy floors and toward the wide, open silence of Blackwood Farm, his great-uncle Arthur's place. The inheritance no one else wanted. To everyone in town, it was a joke. 100 acres of scrubland, a collapsing farmhouse, and a mountain of back taxes. A burden, a trap. But to Leo, it was the only thing he had ever owned. The final bell rang, a shrill liberation. Leo clocked out, avoiding eye contact, and walked out into the crisp Oregon afternoon. His 1988 pickup truck coughed to life. Instead of turning left towards his cramped, rented apartment, he turned right. He drove past the town limits, where the paved roads gave way to gravel, and the air began to smell of pine and damp earth. 20 minutes later, he pulled up to the rusted iron gate, its chains long since broken. The sign, hanging by a single nail, creaked in the wind. Blackwood. The farmhouse was a skeleton against the setting sun, its windows boarded up, the porch sagging like a sad smile. He got out of the truck, the crushing weight of reality settling back onto his shoulders. The mocking laughter from the school echoed in his ears. What are you going to do, Leo? Farm the weeds? The sheer scale of the neglect was overwhelming. It would take a fortune. He didn't have to even make it livable. Despair, cold and heavy, began to coil in his stomach. This wasn't a legacy. It was a tombstone for a dream he hadn't even known he'd had. He kicked at a clump of dirt in frustration, his work boots scuffing the dry ground. As he turned to leave, to drive back to his meaningless life, his foot caught on something hidden in the overgrown grass. He stumbled, catching himself on the truck's fender. Annoyed, he looked down to see what had tripped him. It was a single, flat stone, unlike any other on the property. It was smooth, almost polished, and unnaturally black, and it was protruding from the earth at a strange angle, as if it had been dislodged. Frowning, Leo bent down and tried to pry it loose. It was heavier than it looked. With a grunt, he wrestled it free. Beneath it, the soil was dark and moist, and there, catching the very last ray of the dying sun, was a glint, not of glass or quartz. This was different. It was a deep, fiery, crimson glimmer embedded in the raw earth. Leo froze, his breath catching in his throat. He dropped to his knees, his heart hammering against his ribs. He brushed away the dirt with trembling fingers. It wasn't a trick of the light. There, buried just inches below the surface, was a cluster of rough, red crystals. They seemed to pulse with an inner fire, reflecting the twilight in a way that felt alive. In that moment, the mocking laughter, the aching back, the years of being invisible, all faded into a distant hum. Leo Gutierrez, the janitor, stared at the secret the earth had just whispered to him, and for the first time in decades, he felt a spark of something he barely recognized. Hope. A whisper from the earth. The world narrowed to that single, impossible point of light. The evening breeze rustled the dry grass. The crickets began their nightly chorus. But Leo heard none of it. His entire universe was the size of a quarter, a fragment of buried fire that held him captive. His janitor's hands, callous and stained from years of labor, hovered over the crystals as if they were a holy relic, afraid to touch, afraid to break the spell. Slowly, with a reverence he hadn't felt in a lifetime, he extended a finger. The surface wasn't glassy smooth, but textured, complex, cool to the touch yet seeming to radiate a strange warmth. He scraped gently at the dark soil around it, his heart performing a frantic drum roll against his ribs. The cluster was larger than he'd thought. Not just a few pebbles, but a solid nodule of crimson stone embedded in the Oregon clay. A wild, illogical thought burst into his mind. Rubies. But that was insane. They were tourist shop gems, things from storybooks, not things found by a janitor on a derelict farm he'd inherited. It had to be something else. Colored glass from an old bottle? Slag from some long-forgotten industrial process? But the color was too deep, too vivid. It held the light in a way cheap glass never could, driven by a compulsion he couldn't name. He stood up, his knees popping in protest, and hurried back to his truck. He rummaged through the cluttered cab, past old fast food wrappers and greasy rags, until his fingers closed around the cold steel of his flashlight. His hands were shaking so badly, he fumbled twice before the beam sliced through the twilight. He ran back, dropping to the ground again, and directed the bright white light directly into the hole. The effect was breathtaking. The crystals didn't just reflect the light. They devoured it, fractured it, and threw it back in 1,000 tiny, blazing red sparks. It was like shining a light into a miniature galaxy of frozen crimson stars. The light danced and pulsed, painting his awestruck face with a faint, bloody glow. This was no piece of trash. This was something else. He had to know more. He carefully placed the strange black stone back over the spot, a makeshift guardian for the secret. He didn't want anyone, not a stray hiker, not a curious animal, to find it, not until he understood what it was. The drive back to his apartment was a blur. The worn-out steering wheel felt different under his palms. The faded buildings of Maple Creek seemed to look at him with new, indifferent eyes. He kept seeing the fiery glow behind his own, his mind racing. He walked into his sparse, beige apartment, the silent, a stark contrast of the roaring in his head. He ignored the microwave dinner waiting for him and went straight to his small, cluttered desk where an old laptop sat, its fan whirring like a tired bee. He typed hesitantly into the search engine. Red crystals found in Oregon. The results were a flood of misinformation. New Age healing sites talking about passion and root chakras, tourist pages selling polished stones from Brazil, geology forums with indecipherable jargon. He tried again, his fingers clumsy on the keys. Rare gems, Oregon. Mining, Oregon. An hour slipped by. He learned about Sunstone, Oregon state gem, but it was a soft, golden stone. Nothing like what he'd seen. He read about thunder eggs and obsidian, but nothing fit. Frustration began to creep in. Maybe it was just a beautiful oddity, a geological fluke. The hope that had flared so brightly in his chest began to flicker. He was about to give up, to chalk it up to a tired man's imagination, when he stumbled upon a dusty, archived article from a small regional mining journal. The headline was unassuming. The Lost Fire of the Cascades, a historical look at corundum deposits. His eyes scanned the text. Corundum, the mineral that made rubies and sapphires. The article was mostly about blue sapphires, but a single paragraph near the end made his blood run cold. While sapphires more commonly documented, historical surveys from the late 1800s, notably by a prospector named Elias Blackwood, hinted at the presence of trace amounts of red corundum ruby in the volcanic soil foothills of the western Cascades. Blackwood's claims were largely dismissed by contemporaries as fanciful, and no significant vein was ever verified. The potential, however faint, of a ruby deposit in the region remains one of Oregon's forgotten geological mysteries. Leo stopped breathing. Elias Blackwood. The name was on the original land deed. His great-uncle Arthur's grandfather. The pieces, ancient and rusted, began to click together in his mind. The farm no one wanted. The land everyone thought was worthless. The rambling stories old Uncle Arthur would tell when Leo was a boy. Stories about fire in a rock, that everyone wrote off as the tales of a lonely old man. Leo leaned back in his chair, the worn wood creaking. The laughter from the school cafeteria echoed in his memory, but now it sounded hollow, foolish. They were laughing at a ghost, a story. They had no idea. He looked at his hands, the hands that scrubbed other people's messes every day, and he made a decision. He wouldn't tell a soul. Not yet. He would go back. He would dig, and he would find out if Elias Blackwood's fancy was Leo Gutierrez's fortune. The first dig. Sleep was a foreign country that night. Leo lay on his thin mattress, the springs groaning under his weight, and stared at the water-stained ceiling. His mind was a whirlwind of red light and historical fragments. Elias Blackwood, fire in the rock, the dismissive laughter of geologists a century past. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw that crimson spark, a single defiant star in a universe of darkness. Before the first hint of dawn bleached the night sky, he was already moving. His usual morning routine, the slow, resigned preparation for another day of mopping and scorn, was replaced by a frantic, electric energy. He called in sick to the school, his voice a raspy croak that was barely a lie. He felt feverish with possibility. He drove to the hardware store as the sun was rising, its light painting the quiet streets of Maple Creek in soft orange and gold. The store smelled of cut lumber, fertilizer, and metal. He moved through the aisles with a new sense of purpose, loading a cart with heavy-duty pry bar, a new pointed shovel, a sturdy pickaxe, a sledgehammer, and a stack of 5-gallon buckets. He added a pair of thick leather gloves and a headlamp for good measure. The cashier, a bored teenager, didn't even look up as he rang up the purchases. To him, Leo was just another handyman starting a dirty job. The anonymity was a gift. The truck strained under the new weight as he drove back to Blackwood Farm. Today, the property didn't feel like a tombstone. It felt like a fortress, and he was its sole defender. The sagging porch and boarded windows were a disguise, a mask of failure, hiding a pulse of incredible potential. He parked in the same spot, his heart thudding against his ribs. The morning was cool and still, the only sound the chatter of birds in the tall firs that bordered the property. He pulled on the new gloves, the leather stiff and unfamiliar on his hands. He approached the spot where he'd found the black stone, his footsteps crunching on the dry grass. It was still there, his makeshift guardian. He moved it aside. In the clear light of day, the crystals were even more stunning. They weren't the perfect, faceted gems from a jewelry store display. They were raw, rugged, a cluster of deep blood-red stones veined with darker impurities. But their color was undeniable, a rich, royal crimson that seemed to swallow the morning sun. He started to dig. The work was brutal. The Oregon clay was stubborn, packed hard by years of sun and wind. He drove the point of the shovel into the earth, using his boot to drive it deeper, then levered out heavy clumps of soil. Swing, step, lever. Swing, step, lever. It was a rhythm far removed from the methodical swish of a mop. This was primal. This was creation and destruction in every motion. Sweat soaked through his shirt within minutes. His lower back, already a weak point from a lifetime of labor, began to sing a familiar song of protest. But he didn't stop. The pain was a badge of honor now, a testament to a different kind of work. This wasn't for a paycheck. This was for a future. He dug around the initial cluster, careful not to damage it with his tools. The hole grew wider, deeper. He filled a bucket with soil, then another. He sifted through the dirt with his fingers after each shovelful, looking for more glimmers, more whispers from the earth. And he found them. A few inches down and to the left, his shovel clinked against something hard. He dropped his knees, brushing away the soil to reveal another, smaller cluster of the red crystals. A few minutes later, another. They weren't everywhere, but they were there, scattered like a trail of crimson breadcrumbs leading deeper into the ground. His breath came in ragged, excited gasps. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't a single, lucky find. This was a deposit, a vein. Elias Blackwood hadn't been a fool. He had been a visionary. Leo worked for hours, lost in a trance of exertion and discovery. The sun climbed higher, beating down on his neck. Blisters formed and burst on his palms. The the new leather gloves doing little to protect his soft janitor's skin. He didn't care. Each new glint of red was a shot of adrenaline straight to his heart. By midday, he had a hole nearly 3 feet wide and 2 feet deep. In the bottom of it, the soil was changing color, becoming darker, more densely packed with gravel and strange, igneous rock. And the red crystals were more frequent, thicker. He was on the edge of something big. He could feel it. He sat back on his heels, wiping the sweat from his forehead with a dirty arm. He was exhausted, aching, starving, and dehydrated, and he had never felt more alive. He looked at his raw, trembling hands, then at the growing pile of treasure-filled buckets. A slow smile spread across his face, a genuine smile that felt strange on his features after so long. The laughter of his co-workers, the pitying looks from his neighbors. It all seemed so small now, so distant. They were down there in the town, living their small lives. And he was up here, on the brink of something monumental. He wasn't Leo the janitor anymore. He was Leo the prospector. Leo the heir. He was standing on the edge of a secret that was worth more than all their opinions combined. And he was only just beginning to dig. The weight of a secret. The euphoria of the dig was a powerful drug, but its high was fleeting. As Leo stood, his muscles screaming in protest, the reality of the situation came crashing down with the force of the sledgehammer he'd just been swinging. He was surrounded by buckets of dirt and rock. In the middle of a massive hole on a property he could barely afford to keep. The red crystals, once symbols of dazzling hope, now looked like 1,000 accusing eyes in the harsh afternoon light. What was he supposed to do with them? He couldn't just walk into the town's lone jewelry store and plunk a bucket of raw stones on the counter. News would spread through Maple Creek faster than a wildfire in dry grass. Leo Gutierrez, the joke, with a pile of red rocks he thinks are rubies. The laughter wouldn't just be behind his back this time. It would be to his face. They'd think he'd finally lost it. And what if they were valuable? That thought was even more terrifying. This wasn't a few $100s worth of stones. If this was a real vein, the potential scale was mind-numbing. It attracted more than just mockery. It attracted greed. He was a single man, alone on a vast, isolated property. A prime target. A cold knot of paranoia tightened in his stomach. He looked around, suddenly feeling exposed. The tree line seemed closer, hiding unseen eyes. The creak of a branch was no longer just a wind. It was a footstep. The weight of the secret was immense, a physical pressure on his chest. He had to protect this. But how? He spent the next hour in a frantic, nervous cleanup. He couldn't leave evidence of a dig site out in the open, using the flat side of the shovel. He carefully filled the hole back in, patting the earth down until it looked as undisturbed as he could manage. He scattered dry grass and leaves over the spot. It wasn't perfect, but to a casual glance, it would do. Then came the problem of the buckets. He had 5 of them, filled with soil and the precious, glittering evidence. He couldn't take them to his apartment. Mrs. Gable, his nosy landlord, had a habit of checking in for maintenance issues that always seemed to coincide with curiosity about his life. He loaded the buckets into the bed of his truck, covering them with an old, stained tarp and securing it with bungee cords. Every sound made him jump. The drive back into town was an exercise in pure anxiety. He felt like everyone on the road was looking at him, knowing his secret. He parked behind his apartment building, waiting in the truck for a full 10 minutes, watching the windows, making sure the coast was clear. When he was certain, he moved like a ghost, hauling the heavy buckets up the rickety back stairs one by one, his body groaning in protest. He stacked them in the far corner of his tiny bedroom and threw a blanket over them. It was a pathetic attempt at security, but it was all he had. The next day, he forced himself to go back to work. Walking back into Maple Creek, High was like stepping into a different dimension. The smell of industrial cleaner, the shrill chatter of students, the condescending nods from the teachers, all felt surreal. He was a man living a double life. His body ached in new places, a constant, thrilling reminder of the dig. But he had to hide it, to walk with the same resigned stoop as always. Rough weekend, Gutierrez? Mr. Hendricks, the biology teacher, asked with a smirk as Leo emptied the trash can in his classroom. You look like you got run over. Just the usual, Leo mumbled, not making eye contact. Probably that farm, Hendrik said to a student teacher nearby, not bothering to lower his voice. Trying to clear land by hand, I bet. Some people never learn. The word should have stung. A week ago, they would have carved a new groove of shame into him. But now, they just sounded hollow and foolish. You have no idea what I'm digging for, Leo thought, a strange, fierce pride swelling inside him. He simply nodded and moved on, pushed his car of cleaning supplies down the hall. The real challenge was the isolation. The secret was a live wire inside him, buzzing with energy with no outlet. He longed to tell someone, just one person, to share the incredible burden. He thought of Mara, who worked at the town's diner. She was always kind to him, never joined in the laughter. But could he trust her? The risk was too great. Instead, he turned back to the internet, but his searches became more specific, more clandestine. He used the library's computer instead of his own. His collar turned up as if against a chill. He searched for how to identify raw corundum, Geological Survey Maps Oregon, and most fearfully, what to do if you find a gem deposit. The information was overwhelming and contradictory. He needed an expert, a real geologist. But how to find one without revealing why, and how to pay one. His janitor's salary was a joke compared to professional fees he imagined. He was trapped. He was sitting on a potential fortune, buried in buckets in his bedroom, and he was more alone and desperate than he had ever been. The treasure wasn't freedom yet. It was a cage. Every bucket was a bar, and the secret was a lock. He needed a plan, a way out. But for now, all he could do was keep his head down, mop the floors, and protect the fiery, impossible secret burning a hole in his quiet, invisible life. The unwelcome visitor. A week passed, each day a tightrope walk between his two lives. By day, Leo was the invisible janitor, his mind replaying the glint of red fire while his hands scrubbed graffiti from bathroom stalls. By night, he was a clandestine researcher, hunched over the library computer, his heart pounding as he tried to decipher geological reports and mineral rights law. The buckets in his bedroom sat like silent, accusing monoliths. He had taken to sifting through the dirt with an old kitchen colander over a baking sheet, finding more of the beautiful, terrifying crystals. Their beauty was now intertwined with a deep, gnawing fear. It was Saturday, his day off. He was at Blackwood Farm early, not to dig, but to think. He walked the property's perimeter, trying to see it not as a broken-down ruin, but as an asset that needed securing. The broken gate, the crumbling fences, it was all an open invitation. He was measuring a rotten fence post when the sound of an engine, far smoother and more powerful than his own trucks, broke the morning silence. A late-model, glossy black SUV was rolling up the dirt driveway, kicking up a cloud of dust. Leo's blood went cold. Nobody came out here. Nobody. He stood frozen, watching as the vehicle came to a stop. The door opened. A man in crisp, dark jeans, a polo shirt, and expensive-looking boots stepped out. He had the confident posture of someone who was used to being in charge. It was Clayton Vance. Vance was a local legend, but not the good kind. His family owned a lot of the commercial real estate in the next county over, and he had a reputation for being sharp, ruthless, and always on the lookout for an opportunity. He'd made a fortune buying up distressed properties for pennies on the dollar. Leo had never spoken to him, but he knew the type. He was everything Leo was not, powerful, connected, and hungry. Leo Gutierrez? Vance called out, his voice friendly but carrying an unmistakable edge of authority. He smiled, a flash of perfect white teeth that didn't reach his eyes. Heard you came into some family property. Thought I'd come out and take a look. Leo's mouth went dry. How did he know? Why did he care? It's not for sale, Leo said, the words coming out more bluntly than he intended. Vance's smile widened, condescending. Oh, I'm sure it's not. Place like this, full of history, sentimental value, right? He began to walk slowly, his eyes not on Leo, but scanning the land, the tree line, the lay of the property with a calculating gaze. It was the look of a predator assessing a potential meal. Course, sentiment doesn't pay the back taxes. I heard old Arthur was pretty behind. Must be a burden for a man in your position. Leo felt a hot flush of anger rise up his neck. His position, the janitor, the man who couldn't handle a burden like this. "I'm managing," Leo said, crossing his arms over his chest. "I'm sure you are," Vance said, his tone implying the exact opposite. He stopped walking and turned to face Leo fully. "Look, I'll be straight with you. I'm putting together a large parcel out this way. Recreational hunting land. Your 100 acres would fit nicely in the middle of it. Save you a world of trouble. I'm prepared to make a very fair offer. More than fair, given the state of things." He gestured dismissively at the collapsing farmhouse. Every instinct in Leo's body screamed to refuse. But a colder, more pragmatic part of his mind engaged. Vance was a shark. He didn't drive out here on a whim to make a fair offer on a derelict farm. He'd done his homework. He knew about the taxes. He knew Leo was vulnerable. But did he know more? Had someone seen something? Had word somehow leaked? The paranoia was back, icy and sharp. Was this a genuine offer on worthless land, or was it a probe? A test? "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Vance," Leo said, forcing his voice to stay level. "But like I said, the place isn't for sale. It's family land." Vance's friendly mask slipped for just a second. A flicker of impatience, of annoyance, crossed his features. He looked at Leo not as a person, but as an obstacle, a minor one. Family land can become a family noose real quick, Leo. Think about the taxes. Think about the liability. One kid gets hurt trespassing out here. He let the threat hang in the air. The offer is good for 72 hours. After that, the number goes down. Way down. He didn't wait for a response. He just nodded, got back into his silent SUV, and executed a smooth, three-point turn, heading back down the driveway, leaving Leo standing alone in a cloud of settling dust. The quiet of the farm felt different now. It was no longer a peaceful solitude. It was a vacuum, and Vance's visit had sucked all the air out of it. The man's words echoed in Leo's head. Recreational hunting land. It was a lie. Vance wanted something. He knew something. Leo's eyes darted toward the spot where he'd been digging, now carefully concealed. Had Vance's eyes lingered there a second too long? Had a footprint been left? A tool forgotten? The secret was no longer just his. Clayton Vance, a man with resources and ruthlessness, had sniffed at the edges of it. The clock was ticking. 72 hours. Leo wasn't just fighting against mockery and dead anymore. He was fighting against a predator who had caught the scent of blood in the water. The treasure had just become infinitely more dangerous. A flicker of trust. The 72-hour clock Clayton Vance had imposed ticked loudly in Leo's mind, a metronome counting down to disaster. Every creak of his apartment floorboards felt like a footstep. Every set of headlights sweeping past his window at night was Vance's SUV returning. The buckets of soil in his bedroom were no longer a promise. They were a damning indictment. He was out of his depth, a minnow suddenly swimming with sharks. He couldn't do this alone. The realization was a cold, hard truth. He needed an ally. He needed someone who could look at the crystals and tell him, without a shadow of a doubt, what they were. He needed expertise, but he needed discretion more. The professional geologists he found online were out of the question. Too expensive, too official, too likely to start a paper trail. There was only one person he could think of. The risk was enormous, a gamble with his entire future. But sitting alone and waiting for Vance to return felt like a slower, more certain kind of loss. Mara Flores. She worked the morning shift at the Maple Creek Diner, the one place in town where Leo had ever felt a semblance of warmth. She was around his age, with kind eyes that held a history of her own struggles, and a quiet steadiness that he admired. She never laughed at the jokes the other customers made about him. She'd just top off his coffee and give him a small, sympathetic smile that said, "I see you. I get it." On Monday, his day off, he didn't go to the farm. He went to the diner during the mid-morning lull. The bell above the door jingled, and a familiar smell of grease and coffee wrapped around him. Mara was wiping down the counter, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked up and offered him that same small smile. "Hey, Leo, your usual booth's free." He nodded, his throat tight. He slid into the cracked vinyl booth, his hands sweating. He ordered coffee, his voice a rasp. He watched her move behind the counter, efficient and calm. Was he about to destroy this? Was he about to become just another crazy story she'd tell her friends? She brought the coffee pot over and filled his mug. "You look tired," she said, her voice soft. "That farm keeping you up?" It was a perfect opening. Leo took a shaky breath. "Mara," he began, his voice so low she had to lean in to hear him. I need to ask you something. And I need you to not think I'm crazy." Her expression shifted from casual kindness to genuine concern. She glanced around the empty diner and then slid into the booth opposite him. "Leo, what's wrong?" He reached into the pocket of his worn jacket. His fingers closed around the small cloth pouch he'd put together. It held 3 of the best crystals he'd sifted from the buckets, each about the size of a thumbnail, raw and blazing with color. He pulled it out and placed it on the formica table between them like a holy offering. "I found these," he whispered, his eyes locked on hers. "On the farm." He loosened the drawstring and carefully tipped the crystals onto the table. The morning sun streaming through the diner window hit them, and they exploded with light, painting tiny crimson dots on the white tabletop. Mara's eyes went wide. She didn't gasp or laugh. She stared mesmerized. Slowly, almost hesitantly, she reached out and picked one up, holding it between her thumb and forefinger. She turned it over, watching the light dance within its depths. "Leo," she breathed, her voice full of awe. "What are they?" "I don't know," he admitted, the fear and relief mixing into a potent cocktail in his veins. I think they might be rubies. But I don't know for sure, and I can't ask anyone. Nobody can know." He told her everything then, in a rushed, hushed torrent. The inheritance, the mockery, the discovery, the digging, Clayton Vance's threatening visit. It all spilled out of him, a flood held back for too long. He told her about the buckets in his bedroom, the historical article about Elias Blackwood, his paralyzing fear. She listened, her expression unreadable, still holding the crystal. When he finished, he was breathless, waiting for her to recoil, to call him delusional, to tell him to take his pretty rocks and leave. Instead, she looked from the stone in her hand to his desperate, hopeful face. "My brother," she said quietly. "Luis. He's not a geologist, but he's a master jeweler in Portland. He works with raw stones all the time. He could tell you what this is." Leo's heart leaped into his throat. A jeweler. It was perfect. It was outside of town. It was private. Would he? Leo stammered. Would he keep it quiet? Mara's gaze was steady. "I'll make sure of it." She gently placed the crystal back on the table. "But Leo, if these are real, what Vance did, that makes sense. He has friends at the county assessor's office. He probably saw the inheritance records, saw the land was valuable to you, and thought he could pressure you. He's a vulture, but he doesn't know about this." She pointed to the gems. "He can't know." For the first time since he'd tripped over that black stone, Leo didn't feel entirely alone. He had shared the terrible, wonderful weight of it, and she hadn't laughed. She had believed him. "Thank you, Mara," he said, the words thick with emotion. She gave him a real smile this time, one that reached her eyes. "Don't thank me yet. Let's see what Luis says." She carefully gathered the crystals back into the pouch and handed it to him. "Meet me here tomorrow before my shift. We'll make a plan." Leo left the diner, the little pouch feeling like a live coal in his pocket. The clock was still ticking. The threat of Vance still loomed. But he wasn't facing it alone anymore. A single flicker of trust had been lit in the darkness. And for now, it was enough to keep the shadows at bay. The expert's verdict. The 24 hours between leaving the diner and returning to meet Mara were the longest of Leo's life. He was a live wire of nervous energy, jumping at every sound, his mind cycling through 1,000 scenarios. What if Luis laughed? What if he confirmed they were just pretty rocks? What if he was horrified and told Mara to have nothing more to do with this madness? The hope that had been kindled felt fragile, a candle flame in a hurricane. The next morning, he was at the diner an hour before it opened, pacing in the parking lot. The sky was a leaden gray, threatening rain, matching the storm inside him. Finally, Mara's beat-up sedan pulled in. She got out, holding a simple white envelope. Her expression was serious, but not discouraging. "I talked to Luis last night," she said without preamble, handing him the envelope. "I described him, sent him a few pictures. He was very interested. He said to bring him a sample, just one, but he wrote this for you." Leo's hands trembled as he took the envelope. It wasn't sealed. He pulled out a single sheet of high-quality stationery. The handwriting was precise and elegant. To the finder, based on my sister's description and the photographs, which are admittedly insufficient for a definitive assessment, the material appears consistent with corundum. The color saturation and hexagonal crystal structure she described are highly suggestive of ruby, though trace element analysis is required for confirmation. The apparent size and potential clarity are, if genuine, exceptional for a find of this nature, particularly in that region. I must stress caution. The market for uncut gemstones is complex and fraught with peril for the uninformed. Do not show these to anyone else. Do not attempt to sell them yourself. Their appearance could attract the wrong kind of attention. Bring me one sample. I will examine it and provide a confidential, preliminary evaluation. Respectfully, Luis Flores. Leo read the note twice, then a third time, his heart hammering against his ribs. Consistent with corundum, highly suggestive of ruby. Exceptional. The words swam on the page, each one a seismic shift in his reality. It wasn't confirmation, but it was the next best thing. It was validation from an expert. He wasn't crazy. He wants me to come to Portland? Leo asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mara nodded. He said he can see you tomorrow. His shop is closed on Tuesdays. It'll be private. She bit her lip, looking worried. Leo! He meant what he said about caution. Luis is a straight shooter. If he's warning about the wrong kind of attention, he's seen it before. The gravity of it all settled back onto Leo's shoulders, but it felt different now. It was a shared weight. I have to go, he said. I have to know for sure. The plan was hastily constructed. Leo would call in sick again, a risk, but a necessary one. He would drive to Portland, a 2-hour journey into a world that felt entirely alien to him. Mara gave him the address, a discreet storefront in the city's historic jewelry district. The drive the next morning was a blur of anxiety and white-knuckled focus. The urban sprawl of Portland, with its rushing traffic and anonymous crowds, was overwhelming. He found a parking garage and walked a few blocks to the address, the small pouch with the chosen crystal feeling like it weighed 100 pounds. Luis Flores' shop, Flores Fine Jewelry, was small and elegant with a simple, tasteful display. A bell chimed softly as Leo pushed the door open. The air inside was cool and smelled of metal polish and old wood. A man, who could only be Luis, looked up from behind a glass counter. He had Mara's same kind eyes, but they were sharper, more analytical. He was examining a delicate gold chain with a loop screwed into his eye. "Mr. Gutierrez?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. "Yes. Leo. Please, just Leo." Luis nodded, setting down the chain. He came around the counter and locked the front door, flipping the sign to close. The action sent a fresh jolt of nerves through Leo. This was really happening. "Let's go to the workroom," Luis said, leading him through a curtain into a back room that was a stark contrast to the showroom's elegance. It was a functional, organized chaos of tools, microscopes, and trays of gleaming stones and metal. "May I see it?" Luis asked, holding out a hand. Leo fumbled with a pouch and dropped a single, best crystal into Luis's waiting palm. Luis didn't react. His professional mask was perfect. He carried the stone to a workbench under a bright halogen light. He cleaned it with a soft brush in a solution, then screwed the loop back into his eye. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the light and the frantic beating of Leo's heart. Minutes stretched. Luis turned the stone over and over. He moved to a different microscope, peering into it for a long time. He took a small, sharp tool and scraped gently at a nondescript part of the stone, examining the powder. He tested its hardness with precise, deliberate scratch from a tipped tool. Finally, he straightened up and removed the loop. He turned to Leo, his expression unreadable. "Well," Leo croaked, his throat desert dry. Luis took a deep breath. "It's corundum," he said, his voice still calm, but with a new, undeniable intensity beneath the surface. The specific gravity, the hardness, the crystal habit, it's all consistent. And the color, he paused, looking at the stone with something akin to reverence. "Leo, this isn't just ruby. This is pigeon's blood ruby, the most valuable kind. The color it's flawless." He picked up the stone again. "It's raw. It needs cutting, and a full analysis will determine its exact value. But a stone of this size and color?" Luis let out a low whistle. "We're not talking thousands. We're talking a lot more." He looked Leo dead in the eye, all pretense of professional detachment gone. "My sister said you found more. How much more?" Leo's legs felt weak. He leaned against a workbench for support. "Buckets," he whispered. The word hung in the air between them. Luis's eyes widened, just for a fraction of a second, before professional composure slammed back into place. But Leo had seen it. The shock, the awe. "Then my warning stands, but it's multiplied by 100, Luis said, his voice grave. "You are sitting on a fortune that most people cannot comprehend. You cannot tell anyone. You cannot trust anyone." The expert's verdict was in. It was real. It was priceless. And the danger had just escalated beyond anything Leo had ever imagined. The offer and the threat. The drive back from Portland was a surreal journey through a world that looked the same but felt fundamentally altered. The words "pigeon's blood ruby" echoed in Leo's mind, a sacred mantra with terrifying implications. Luis's grave warning was a constant drumbeat beneath the hum of the truck's engine. You cannot trust anyone. The fortune wasn't a liberation. It was a target painted on his back. He pulled into Maple Creek as the evening lights were flickering on. He felt like a ghost returning to a life that no longer fit. His small, shabby apartment felt like a movie set, a flimsy facade for a character he wasn't playing anymore. The buckets in the corner seemed to hum with potential energy, their contents transformed from curious rocks into bars of solid gold. He had just stepped inside, the key still in the lock, when his cheap prepaid phone buzzed. It was an unknown number, but with a local area code. His blood ran cold. He knew. He just knew. He answered, his voice rough. "Hello? Leo. Clayton Vance." The voice was smooth, devoid of its earlier false friendliness. It was all business now. The 72 hours were up. "Have you considered my offer?" Leo's grip tightened on the phone. He thought of the ruby in Luis's workshop, glowing under the halogen light. He thought of the buckets. He found a strength he didn't know he possessed. "I have. The answer is still no, Mr. Vance. The land is not for sale." There was a long silence on the other end of the line, so complete Leo could almost hear the man's cold calculations. When Vance spoke again, the temperature of his voice had dropped to freezing. "That's unfortunate. I did some more digging, Leo. Interesting thing, property records and historical surveys." Leo's heart stopped. Historical surveys. Elias Blackwood. "Turns out your crazy old great-uncle wasn't the first Blackwood to have fanciful ideas about that land." Vance continued, his tone dripping with condescension. "His grandfather filed some wild claims back in the 1880s. Talk of rubies. Everyone wrote him off as a prospector who'd spent too long in the sun. But you're out there all the time now, aren't you? Digging. A man doesn't dig like that unless he's looking for something. Or unless he's found it." Leo said nothing. He couldn't. The paranoia was no longer feeling. It was a reality. Vance hadn't just guessed. He'd connected the dots. He'd done his homework and found the same historical thread Leo had. Vance mistook his silence for fear, which it was. "Here's what's going to happen. Gutierrez, you're going to sell me that land. Today. For the original offer. Which, given the new context, is now an act of charity on my part. You get the taxes paid off and a little walking around money. A fair deal for a janitor." The word janitor was a deliberate slap, a reminder of his place. "And if I refuse?" Leo managed to say, his voice thin. Vance's laugh was short and ugly. "Then I start making phone calls. First to the county. I'll tell them I have reason to believe you're conducting unpermitted mining operations on a historical site. They'll shut you down, fine you into oblivion, and tie that land up in litigation until you're dead. Then I'll call the state geologist. Then I'll call a reporter I know in Portland who loves a good, lost mine story. Your little secret will be front-page news by the weekend. You'll have every treasure hunter, every crazy prospector, and every serious mining company in the state crawling over that property. They'll tear it to pieces. And you, he paused, letting the threat sink in. You'll get nothing. You'll lose it all. And everyone in this town will have proof that you're exactly the fool they always thought you were. The offer was a robbery. The alternative was annihilation. Vance wasn't just a greedy businessman. He was a strategist. He had boxed Leo in completely. If Leo fought him, he'd lose everything in a very public, very humiliating way. If he gave in, he'd get pennies for a fortune. I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers, Vance said, his voice final. I expect your signature by 5 o'clock tomorrow. Don't be stupid, Leo. Know your limits. The line went dead. Leo stood in the middle of his apartment. The phone clutched in his hand, the dial tone buzzing like a dying insect. The walls felt like they were closing in. Vance had him. He had all the power, all the connections, all the leverage. The euphoria from Luis's verification was gone, crushed under the boot of cold, hard reality. The treasure was real, but it was already being stolen from him. He had until 5 o'clock tomorrow. 24 hours to sign away a future he'd only just begun to believe in or face total ruin. He looked at the buckets, the hidden fortune. They represented a life of dignity, of respect, of never being looked down on again. And it was all slipping through his fingers. He had never felt more powerless. The janitor had found the king's ransom, but the courtier was already at the door with a royal decree, ready to seize it all. The secret was out, and it had become a weapon aimed directly at his heart. The only way out. The night was endless. Leo didn't sleep. He paced the confines of his apartment, a caged animal with nowhere to run. Clayton Vance's ultimatum echoed in the silence, a death knell for his dream. 5 o'clock, a deadline for his own execution. Sign away his future or be publicly destroyed. The two options were a trapdoor and a hangman's noose. Both led to the same end. He felt the weight of his entire life pressing down on him. The years of being overlooked, of quiet desperation, of accepting his lot because it was all he believed he deserved. This inheritance, this miracle, was supposed to be his chance to break the cycle. Instead, it was proving every negative thing he'd ever thought about himself. That he wasn't smart enough, strong enough, or connected enough to ever truly win. As the first gray light of dawn filtered through his dusty window, a strange calm descended upon him. The panic didn't vanish, but was joined by something else, a cold, hard kernel of resolve. He was backed into a corner, yes, but cornered animals were the most dangerous. He would not go quietly. He would not simply hand over Elias Blackwood's legacy to a vulture like Vance. He thought about Luis's warning. You cannot trust anyone. But he had trusted Mara, and that trust had been his lifeline. He needed to trust again. He needed an ally who operated in a world Vance couldn't easily bully or buy. He waited until a reasonable hour. Then he picked up his phone. His hand was steady now. He dialed the number for Flores Fine Jewelry. Luis Flores. The voice was calm, professional. Luis, it's Leo Gutierrez. From yesterday. A pause. Leo, is everything all right? No, Leo said, his voice low and urgent. It's not. The man I told you about, Clayton Vance. He knows. He connected the historical dots. He's threatening me. He's given me until 5 today to sign over the land for a fraction of what it's worth, or he goes public and brings in the government to seize everything. On the other end of the line, Luis was silent for a long moment. Leo could almost hear the gears turning. I see, Luis said finally, his tone grim. That is a serious problem. He's using the system against you. I can't fight him, Leo said, the admission painful but true. I don't have the money for lawyers. I don't have any influence. He'll win. Perhaps not, Luis said, his voice thoughtful. There's another way, a preemptive strike. What do you mean? You don't fight him in the courts. You make the story too big for him to control. Luis explained, his words coming faster now. You go public, but on your own terms. You don't go to local reporter. You go to the biggest, the Associated Press, the New York Times. You present the complete story. The struggling janitor, the inherited worthless farm, the historical mystery, the discovery, and the local bully trying to steal it all. You make it a story about David and Goliath. You make it irresistible. Leo's mind reeled. The idea of inviting that much attention was terrifying. But the treasure hunters, the chaos, that's what Vance threatened. It's a risk, Luis conceded, but a calculated one. Once the story is national, the eyes of the world are on you and that land. The county will be hesitant to move against you under that spotlight. Vance will be painted as the villain. He'll be toxic. And most importantly, it will force the hand of the proper authorities. You file an official claim with the Bureau of Land Management immediately before the story breaks. You establish yourself as the rightful claimant. It becomes a legal process, not a back alley shakedown. Leo sank onto his bed, the plan unfolding in his mind. It was audacious. It was terrifying. It was the only shot he had. I have a contact, Luis said, a journalist at the Oregonian. She's ethical, tough, and she hates corruption. She'll verify the story, get the geology right, and she'll protect you. But you have to decide now. We have to move fast. Leo looked around his shabby apartment. He looked at his hands, the janitor's hands that had unearthed a kingdom. This was the moment. He could choose to be the victim, to be the Leo everyone expected him to be, or he could choose to be Elias Blackwood's heir. He took a deep, shuddering breath. Do it, he said, his voice firm for the first time. Call her. I will, Luis said. But Leo, once I make this call, there's no turning back. Your life will change forever. It already has, Leo replied. He hung up the phone. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but was now joined by a fierce, burning determination. Vance had thought he was dealing with a pushover, a man who knew his place. He was about to find out he was dealing with a Gutierrez. And at Blackwood, he had a plan. It was a Hail Mary, a desperate gamble with everything on the line. But for the first time since he'd inherited the farm, he wasn't on the defensive. He was taking control. The clock was still ticking toward 5 o'clock, but the meaning of the deadline had changed. It was no longer the end. It was the moment the fight would truly begin. A fortune and redemption. The hours between Leo's call with Luis and 5 o'clock were a vortex of controlled chaos. He moved through it in a state of surreal detachment, every sense heightened. He could hear the individual ticks of the clock on his wall, each one a step closer to the precipice. Luis had called back within the hour, his voice crackling with urgency. The journalist, Sarah Bennett, was intrigued, deeply intrigued. She was already digging into Clayton Vance's business practices and promised to be on a call with him by 4:30. Leo spent the afternoon at the library computer, with Luis on the phone walking him through the process of filing an official mining claim with the Bureau of Land Management. The forms were complex, a labyrinth of legal jargon that made his head spin. But Luis was a patient guide. With each field completed, each digital signature applied, Leo felt a little more of Vance's stranglehold loosen. He was no longer a squatter on his own land. He was a claimant. It was a thin shield, but it was something. At 4:25, his phone buzzed. It was Luis, connecting a conference call. Leo, you're on with Sarah Bennett. Mr. Gutierrez. A woman's voice came on the line, crisp, professional, and direct. Luis has given me the broad strokes. I need to hear everything from you. Start from the beginning, and be fast. For the third time in a week, Leo told his story. But this time, it wasn't to a kind diner waitress or meticulous jeweler. It was to a journalist. He held nothing back. He spoke of the mockery, the crushing weight of the inheritance, the glint in the soil, the terrifying visit from Vance, and the specific, vile threats. He spoke with a raw honesty he didn't know he was capable of, his voice shaking not with fear, but with a long-suppressed anger. Sarah listened without interruption. When he finished, there was a beat of silence. Okay, she said, and Leo could hear the faint sound of her typing. I've pulled the property records. I've already found 3 complaints against Vance's company for predatory land buying tactics. This fits a pattern. Luis, you're confident in your assessment of the sample? Absolutely. Luis's voice was firm. I'd stake my professional reputation on it. Then here's what's going to happen, Sarah said. I'm writing this now. It goes live on the Oregonian's website at 5:15. I've already alerted the Associated Press. The headline will be, Oregon Janitor's Inheritance Reveals Fortune, Attracts Vulture Developer. We'll use your name, Leo. There's no protecting your anonymity now. This story only works if it's personal. Are you prepared for that? Leo's heart was a trip hammer. He looked out the library window at the sleepy town of Maple Creek. By dinner time, everyone would know. There would be no hiding. Yes, he said, the word feeling like a vow. At 4:58, his personal phone rang. It was Vance's number. Leo let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text came through. My lawyer is waiting. This is your last chance. Don't be an idiot. Leo didn't respond. He just watched the clock. At 5:15 exactly, he refreshed the Oregonian's website. There it was. His story. His face, a photo from his old school ID, was right beside a picture of the crumbling Blackwood farmhouse. The article was a masterpiece, a compelling narrative of struggle, discovery, and corporate threat. It quoted the historical documents about Elias Blackwood. It featured a brief, powerful statement from Luis Flores, confirming preliminary identification of high-value corundum, and it detailed Clayton Vance's threats with devastating clarity. Leo's phone exploded. It started with a few text messages from numbers he didn't know, then a call from a Portland area code, then another and another. He silenced it, his hands trembling. By 6 o'clock, the story had been picked up by the Associated Press. By 7, it was trending on social media. News vans from Portland stations were reportedly on their way to Maple Creek. He drove to Mara's diner. She was just finishing her shift, her eyes wide as she looked at her own phone. She saw him walk in and ran over, pulling him into a tight hug. Leo, it's everywhere, she whispered. The bell on the diner door jingled. Mr. Hendricks, the biology teacher, walked in. He saw Leo and stopped dead. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by a look of stunned, almost embarrassed disbelief. He gave a curt, awkward nod and quickly found a booth, unable to meet Leo's eyes. It was a small moment, but it was everything. The narrative had flipped. He was no longer the mock janitor. He was the underdog, the local hero. Weeks later, the full geological survey commissioned by a reputable and now very public mining investment group confirmed it. The Blackwood farm sat on one of the largest ruby deposits ever discovered in North America. The initial valuation, $120 million. The money was life-changing, incomprehensible. But for Leo, the real fortune wasn't in the dollar figure. It was in the quiet that settled over Maple Creek. The mockery ceased. The pitying looks vanished. He paid the back taxes. He hired a crew to start restoring the farmhouse, not to a mansion, but to a home worthy of Elias Blackwood's legacy. He stood on the porch of the slowly healing house, looking out at his land. The secret was out, and it had set him free. He hadn't just found a fortune in rubies. He had found redemption, respect, and the courage to finally stand tall. The janitor had become a king, not by birthright, but by sheer, unyielding perseverance. Did this story of hidden treasure and incredible perseverance inspire you? If it did, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that like button. Your support helps us find and share more powerful stories of everyday people overcoming impossible odds. Turn on notifications so you never miss a journey of transformation. What would you do if you inherited a secret worth millions? Let us know in the comments below.